perpetrators. When we were working around in Science, we were thinking about this panel, and for example, we in Serbia we have like the perspective of the victims. We talked about Hilda Dice and the victims, but we don't have any perspective from any studies actually on the perpetrators, on the female perpetrators. So this is one of the reasons why this conference is really important for us, because I think that also this conference can open new perspectives, new study perspectives here in Serbia for us, especially for our students. We have 4 speakers. The first is Verena Meier. Thank you for being here. She studied history, English philology, European art history, and philosophy. And she actually works at the research center on Antigypsyism at the University of Heidelberg. And the title of her PhD project is Criminal Police and Genocide, the Nazi Persecution of Sinti and Roma in Magdeburg, and transnational justice after 45 under the Allies and in the GDR. I think that also this is something new. I mean, when we talk about the Holocaust, it's always important to have also at least one panel where we can deal also with the history of Roma, or the Roma victims. So please, Verena, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. Okay. Thank you for the kind Thank you for the kind introduction and presenting me. Today I'm not going to talk about my PhD project in particular, which is a very specific local case study, but I want to talk about the genocide of Sinti and Roma from a gender historical perspective, because this is also something that's often neglected in the current research on Sinti and Roma, and it's an essential part of my PhD, but I want to give a broader perspective here for the audience today. But first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this conference and giving me the opportunity to speak. And I want to thank Jakov and Lily in particular, first of all, for establishing WHISC and being here in the times where Israel is facing another war. And I also want to express my deep solidarity with Israel and my friends and my closed ones there. And since I do research on perpetrators, I think it's important to say Hamas is a terrorist organization and they are committing crimes against humanity in Israel right now. So I just feel very much reminded of my own research. So, to dive into the topic, it's not going forward. No, okay. No? No, but this is just the pointer.
No, give it to the computer. Towards the computer.
Towards the computer?
Yes.
No, okay. Okay. So, yeah, to start with the topic, I would like to first of all make a few remarks about the research on this topic in general, like the Holocaust from a gender historical perspective. And I want to highlight 2 aspects. We talked about testimony and the relevance of testimony, of female testimony in particular, and the first German and German language written testimonies were by Philomena Franz and Sanja Stoiker in 1985 and 1988, but it took almost another 20 years till the research was established on that, and on the female perspective in particular by Sybil Milton, Hidden Lives, Sinti and Roma Women, in a collective volume I think most of us are familiar with, Experience and Expressions, Women, the Nazis and the Holocaust from 2003. So the question arises, female survivors gave a testimony already in the 80s. Why did it take so long? And in this conference, we already highlighted one aspect. It's the silencing of female perspective and voices in research because of the overall dominant male perspective, which was assumed to be like the general perspective of all people who were persecuted. A second reason why it took so long, and that's more specific to the history of Sinti and Roma, are the epistemic inequalities. That means that history on the Sinti and Roma for a long time had been conducted by non-Sinti and Roma researchers only. So it was a history about and on Sinti and Roma from an outside perspective, and often researchers projected their own stereotypes and prejudices onto their research topic and the people they researched. And after the war, Sinti and Roma survivors were facing anti-Gypsyist continuities. They had a hard time receiving compensation because, like, the Nazis were in old structures and they had the definitions, the power to define and to shape the discourse. And in Germany and Europe, a civil rights movement arose to change the narrative and discourse. And only recently, Sinti and Roma scholars are now participating in scholarship and in academia and arguing that there should be no research on the topic without their participation and voices. And so that's why it took so long. And compared to the Holocaust studies in general, critical research on the genocide of Sinti and Roma is quite delayed. So first studies came out in the 1980s and 1990s. One researcher to mention, Ian Hancock, who has a Romani background himself, or for like German speakers, Michael Zimmermann, and his fundamental study was from 1996. So like we're very much delayed with the research on this topic. I would like to give some insights into four perspectives. It's a bit eclectic, so I'm not giving a chronological presentation here, but I want to shed a light on the intersectionality and persecution measures that Romani women were facing, the forms of resistance of Sinti and Roma women, female perpetrators, which I think is also very important to look at, and if we have time, deal with memory. So let's start with intersectionality and persecution measures. So how Sinti and Roma women were affected by discrimination because of their race as a category and gender as a social category. The decree, there was a decree at the beginning of the war from 1939 against so-called fortune-telling women, Sinti and Roma women, or so-called Gypsy women. And Sinti and Roma women were affected by interlocking categories of persecution already for a long time, and there were gender-specific stereotypes that were attributed to women only, such as the stereotype of fortune-telling or deviant sexual behavior. And these stereotypes had already manifested in the European discourse since centuries. And this decree from 1939 ordered the transfers of Sinti and Roma women to the Ravensbrück concentration camp in 1939. And it was specifically directed at women. And local studies were able to demonstrate that this decree did not cause mass deportations, but the criminal police could refer to it quite flexibly whenever they wanted to enforce their power on the persecuted women and their forms of repression, and transferred them to concentration camp. Fortune-telling was, however, also, since the dominant society had the stereotype in mind and demanded it from the women, a source of income for many women. So there's this double-edged sword. Around 250,000 and 500,000 members of the minority fell victim to the genocidal policies of the Nazis and their collaborators. Deportations from Germany to ghettos and camps in occupied Poland started in May 1940, and from February 1943 onwards, Sinti and Roma from the German Reich and annexed or occupied territories such as Austria, Bohemia and Moravia, Alsace, or Poland were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and around 23,000 were incarcerated in the extermination camp and registered in this ledger, the so-called main Gypsy book, Hauptbuch, which is an important source for research. And here you can see a page from this book that registered all women who were transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And interestingly, on this page, you also find the names of 16 babies. And they were born inside the extermination camp on August 30 and September 5 and 9. And no research exists so far on these babies that were born inside Auschwitz-Birkenau, and pregnancy and childbirth was a specific female experience. So here we have just another research gap, and we see why it's like the sources are there. They are even online, but no research has been conducted so far. Let's look at forms of resistance. As with the Jewish population, the first waves of mass arrests and transports to concentration camps targeted mainly the men and the male population, and women were left off with their families and had to take on extra roles and found new forms of resistance. Following the wave of mass arrests of people stigmatized as so-called asocials, we have another presentation on that. Among the male Sinti and Roma in the course of the Aktion Arbeit Scheue Reich in June 1938, family members, and particularly the female ones, wrote petitions and asked for the release from the concentration camps of their husbands, sons, and fathers. And here you can see an example, and I'm not going to read it out because of the time, but you see a very emotional expression of the woman and how she described how the family always tried to settle in different towns, get an apartment, get work, but they were forced out of every town because of the stereotypes and discrimination, and eventually the police stigmatized her husband as a person who was so-called work shy and didn't want to work, but it was the social conditions around them who forced them into this kind of situations. And there are, for my research on Magdeburg, in total more than 30 men were deported to Sachsenhausen or Buchenwald, and I found petitions for 27. So there was a high organized activity, and only 5 were released. Also in other regional contexts, such petitions can be found, and they were also predominantly written by Romani women. For example, in Estonia, France, or Romania. Peter Mattei analyzed the petitions to authorities in the way of fighting through legal means for survival in contrast with illegal means, such as escaping or passing in the context of deportations of Romani men and women from Romania to camps in Transnistria. In this context of persecution, the distinction between sedentary and itinerant was crucial, and Mattei concludes, I quote, "Those who chose to fight back exclusively by legal means or simply waited for formal redress had fewer chances to survive," end of quote. These petitions to state authorities were written in the name of or by Sinti and Roma women, but differ massively to private letters that were sent from family members to family members or friends. Because in these letters to state authorities, they pick up on the Nazi ideology. And sometimes you find in these letters that they state they got used to work. Here's another example of a letter that was smuggled out of Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1943 by Margarete Bamberger. And she wrote this to her sister Martha in Berlin. And she described the misery, hunger, violence, and abuse in the camp, where 70% of the incarcerated had died between spring and winter 1943. Margarete Bamberger coded her secret message to her sister using words in the Romani language, which would not be detected by the censorship and which helped avoid it that anyone got punished. She wrote, I quote, "Special greetings from Baro, Naslepin, Elenta, and Maripin," which translates as large-scale disease, misery, and murder. Also in Eastern Europe, Roma women expressed forms of resistance and agency, and I would like to give the example of the Polish Roma woman Alfreda Nunkia-Makowska. In the area of the Rear Army of the front of Eastern Europe, mass shootings were a specific characteristic of the war of extermination in the East. There, Roma were shot by the Einsatzgruppen of the SD and SS, as well as the Wehrmacht members and their collaborators from place to place, and often together with the Jewish population and other persecuted groups. The Polish Roma woman Makowska survived the shooting near Biała Podlaska, and after that, the Nazi occupiers interned her in the ghetto of Lublin, Łódź, and Belsen. After she managed to escape, she used false papers to get work, expanding the railroad line to the Nazi labor camp for Roma in Rosvadov, and she rescued Jewish and Sinti and Roma children from trains headed to Auschwitz or Belzec extermination camps and searched for surviving children at sites of mass shootings. She placed them in hiding, provided them with food and false papers, and placed them with family members in foster families where they found further protection. Also, Sinti, Roma women in Eastern Europe were fighting in partisan units, and to cut it short, I just referred to the research of my colleague Vola Bartac, who wrote extensively about Romani women in Belarus. I'd like to turn to female perpetrators. And in 1938, Heinrich Himmler, the chief of the German police and SS, declared that the so-called gypsy question should be solved by the essence of the race. And two institutions in Germany and the annexed territories were crucial for implementing this order, and there was the police and the so-called Racial Hygiene Research Center. So like it was medical professionals at the Reichsgesundheitsamt. And here I would just highlight two aspects. Often women found in these institutions new positions and roles. They had been educated in care before, and now they moved up in the labor market, and they saw it often as a form of emancipation in the labor market. And what is characteristic, if you look at the female perpetrators, that they often had a focus on women and children. And for example, for the police, these criminal police officers were responsible for the deportation of individual children, for example, to extermination camps and youth detention camps that we'll hear about later. In the post-war period, we also find that gender stereotypes and norms played a huge role in the prosecution of these female Nazi perpetrators. And often in these trials, you find the underlying assumption that a so-called normal German woman could not have committed crimes. And the women who were tried, they referred to these assumptions and said, no, I didn't do that. I did it because some male superior said to do so. And they played with these norms and then did not get sentenced. That's the case for Justine. And in the case of other female perpetrators who could not rely on these gender stereotypes, for example, Erika Bergmann, who was a SS guard in Ravensbrück and was responsible for several maltreatments of Sinti and Roma women in Ravensbrück. She was described as a beast that was only covered in human skin, so they were seen as abnormal and beastly. And often in these trials, either the people who gave a testimony or the judges refer to gender norms when coming up with a verdict. Memory, I just want to stress that Sinti and Roma women were already active in the Europe-wide women's movement at the beginning of the 20th century. And after the end of the Second World War, they campaigned for women's and civil rights in West Germany. And here the protest for civil rights was closely linked with the political recognition of the genocide itself. Theresia Winterstein-Seible founded the first German women's organization of Sinti and Roma women in the early 1980s, and no one knows about it in Germany. and campaigned in particular for the recognition of victims of forced sterilizations and prosecutions of the perpetrators of these medical crimes. And only last year, a street was named after her in Würzburg. And I would like to end with a poem by Saya Stoica. I showed you her memoir at the beginning. And in 1988, at the time when she also wrote her memoir, she found other ways of expressing what she experienced through art. And she was a carpet seller at that time, and so she used forms of writing and painting and drawing to express her experience from imprisonment in Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, and Bergen-Belsen. And she wrote in one of her poems, "Are you afraid of the darkness? I will tell you where the road is deserted. You need not to be afraid. I am not afraid. My fear remained in Auschwitz, in the camps. Auschwitz is my coat, Bergen-Belsen is my dress, and Ravensbrück is my undershirt. What should I be afraid of?" Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Verena, for your really inspiring presentation. I think that we will have time in the discussion. I have at least 2 or 3 questions for you, but we will leave them for the discussion. Now, okay, you need the presentation. The second speaker is Claire Topsom from the Royal Holloway University in London. She is a student, and her research is focused on female asocials in Nazi camps, and this is also the topic of your presentation. Please. Okay.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Publications, papers and conferences focusing on gendered experiences have increased and mostly explore the experiences of Jewish women under the Nazis. These are valuable contributions to gendered experiences, but they do not address the many non-Jewish women persecuted by the Nazis who continue to receive limited attention in research. One such group that has received limited attention are the Asocials. They're a group who were not recognised as a persecuted victim by the Bundestag until 2020, 75 years after liberation. So who were the Asocials? The definition of an asocial included, but was not exclusive to, begging, being homeless, unemployed, in receipt of welfare benefits. However, the crime of being asocial was actually shaped by gender and firmly connected intestinally to how women use their bodies, as under the Nazis, only women were incarcerated for prostitution or sexual deviancy. But why? In propaganda, the Nazis portrayed women as virtuous. Their bodies were to support the nation and their children. The Nazis were attempted to build an orderly state, and as carriers of future generations, the female body, if uncontrolled, represented a threat. Attributing sexual acts to a criminal category, the Nazis sought to control the female body, as it would become property of the state. With this focus, the Nazis were able to reinforce female asociability with the immoral misuse of the female body. Reinforcing asociability with controlling the female body started in 1933 with the Law for the Prevention of Genetically Diseased Offspring. This law initially appears to be indiscriminate of gender, as it focused on sterilising genetically inferior men and women. The sterilisation law targeted German citizens the Nazis believed would have a negative impact on the health of the nation because they believed they had genetic traits such as mental health and physical disabilities, but also asocials. The propaganda picture you see shows the Nazis' view that asociability is genetic, depicting the descendants from a female asocial as immoral and not a conscientious contributor to society who could cost the Nazi nation 5 million marks. Now, the exact number of people sterilised, legally or illegally, is unknown. However, Catherine Braun states the approximate number of legal sterilisations was around 360,000. Of which 500 to 600 men and 5,000 to 6,000 women died during the procedure. The patterns of death provides a clear indication of whose body the Nazis needed to control. The sterilisation procedure was more complicated for women, which does provide some reasoning for the disparity in the number of deaths by gender. However, the high mortality rate of women sterilised indicates more women were sterilised under this law. This implies women's bodies, uncontrolled or unregulated, were seen as a threat to the Volksmine shaft and the future of the Third Reich. The Nazis also reinforced the historic stereotypical view of a female asocial with sexual activities from 1933 with their attempt to remove prostitutes from the streets, as the Hamburg police arrested over 3,000 prostitutes during March and May in the same year. The Nazis had portrayed themselves as guardians of conventional sexual morality, fighting to reverse the moral decay surrounding prostitution that they felt had increased during the Weimar years, suggesting that the women providing this service endangered the community. Therefore, from 1933, the Nazis officially criminalised the historic stereotype of a female asocial. However, in 1937, brothels were introduced into towns, and from 1942, they were established in 10 concentration camps to be used by privileged inmates or as a reward for increased productivity. The majority of the women placed into the camp brothels were from the asocial category, further reinforcing asocials' connection with sexual behaviour. This connection of female asocials and sexual acts has resulted in the asocials' position as victims of the Nazis being compromised, as the majority of testimony from survivors implied the women who wore the black triangle were complicit through their actions and not a threat to the Nazis, but were a threat to standards of morality. Basically, any woman who wore a black asocial triangle was collectively referred to as a prostitute or sexual deviant, whether this was their crime or not. From 1939, many female asocials were incarcerated for being work shy, but this is not clearly noted in testimony. In a war economy, women were needed for work. This was not officially pursued by the Nazis until 1943, when female labour conscription was introduced. Employment figures in 1939 for women were 14 million, but by 1944 had increased to just 14.9 million. These figures demonstrate that the women did not comply with the government's call for their support, and is also reflected in the female convictions, as the women arrested in 1942 nearly doubled those figures from 1937. Brunel Blau's 1952 study of crime statistics in Germany by year, gender and age during World War I and II examines the various crimes people were arrested for. The second largest criminal activity in 1943 was for breaches of work discipline, in which nearly 30,000 people were arrested, of which Blau's response in the report implies surprise at the almost 400% increase, as shown on the screen. Though the figure is not divided into male and female data, the number of people arrested for this crime would have included women. In 1943, labour conscription made the crime of being work shy for women official, and it's noted on female asocial records found in the ITS. However, women arrested for breaches of work discipline were arrested for breaches of work discipline from as early as 1939. The figures from 1939 show only 10 women were officially incarcerated for being work shy, but by 1942, this number had increased to nearly 7,500. Blau's study also has a section for crimes of a sexual nature, noted as moral offences, which included unnatural immorality and pimping. The number of people arrested for these moral offences had significantly decreased after 1939. Therefore, more asocial women were being incarcerated for breaches of work and not moral crimes. However, the asocial connection with crimes of a sexual nature has remained unchanged. This is the same for asocial women incarcerated for black market trading, which grew due to the 1936 four-year plan focus towards war preparations, which was at the expense of the consumer and export industry. One traditional role the Nazis promoted for women was to help the nation by maintaining a food supply in the home and to cook cheaply and responsibly. To do this, many women did participate in black market trading, either by the supply or purchase of items. Record from Stutthof concentration camp confirm female involvement and incarceration as an asocial for black market trading. For example, we find Verena and Helena. They were incarcerated as asocials for selling snaps. The women are described as lazy and dishonest on their arrest records, engaged in surreptitious trade or other criminal activities, therefore not able to confirm where they received their income from. However, in testimony, reference or connection to asocial women and black market trading is not made. The Nazis' focus towards controlling women and their bodies had built a societal assumption that surreptitious trade or other criminal activities was actually of a sexual nature, hence the continued reference towards female asocials and sexual deviancy. Though propaganda infers the Nazis were attempting to create a moral sexual purity for German society, they were also encouraging women to use their bodies to improve the morale of men through forced sex labour in brothels in camps. The use of sex in camps by inmates, penetrative or otherwise, and camp brothels has received little attention in research due to the lack of resources, but also because in an environment designed to remove humanity, create despair and murder people, we find a place of extreme sexual violence, but also where, on occasion, men and women did participate in intimate acts for emotional support. Though this was rare, the disappearance of the sex drive was one of the first results of being in a concentration camp. But by placing brothels in camps, the Nazis has reinforced that the women selected represented the moral decay, that only the most rotten in society could engage in sexual acts, penetrative or otherwise, during their incarceration. But the asocial women in the brothels were not taking pleasure from their experiences, and they certainly did not represent a moral decay. Camp inmates, male and female, were treated like animals, unable to maintain the most basic standards of hygiene, often surrounded by feces and disease. Death often occurred due to the conditions, but could be sped up due to the inmates' emotional and mental well-being. In testimony, there is a perception that the brothels would have actually provided a short break from the reality of camp life, as for a woman, being placed in a brothel meant better food, space, a bed with sheets, the ability to wash oneself or even grow their hair. However, in reality, the physical and mental aspect of their forced labour would have meant the reverse. In general, the implied reaction towards women who were used for forced sex labour in the brothels varies from disgust to dismissive, in that they should not be spoken about. Moreover, the women in the brothels, or those who engage in sexual acts for intimate reasons, are referred to as making, as what Primo Levi would suggest, a choiceless choice. Anna Hayakova challenges this notion that using the term choiceless choice devalues the women's actions, implying the decisions and choices they made in the camps were meaningless. Certainly, the balance in the power in the camps were not in favour of the inmates, whatever their status, and choice was extremely limited. However, in the relation to the use of one's body for intimate acts, Hayakova does make a valid point. The women would not have made a nonchalant choice. The benefits to either the woman or those around them would have been considered. There were inmates who stole from others, took food and clothes from the dying, yet they are not judged in testimony in the same way as those who used their bodies for survival. These are all acts that most people would not consider taken in a normal society. And it's important to remember that in camps, there was no normal society. In order to survive, choices were made. And though the choices were extremely limited, they were choices that essentially helped that woman and that person at that moment in time, and therefore should not be regarded as a choiceless choice, stigmatised, vilified for using their bodies for survival in places of extreme violence. Female asocials have not been seen as victims because of this connection, and because they were considered connection with sexual deviants, prostitutes, and the small number who were placed as forced sex labourers in the camp brothels. It is the latter connection that has reinforced the perception that asocials were complicit or unworthy victims, as the women who were placed in the brothels were seen to have benefited in camps through the conditions and money. Though brothel records are limited, there are income records. Which list the names of the women working there, along with the revenue taken for the day. These records also imply the women were paid a salary. So we can see here on the screen that they were paid between 10 and 25 Reichsmarks on the same day. The women in the brothels were generating money for the camps. However, it's unclear if they received this as an income, though there are records to show money was withdrawn and paid to the women or sent to a family member outside the camp. If the women or the family members actually received the money and what they used it for, it is unclear. However, the favourable conditions of money earned in the brothels has diminished the women's status in survivor testimony and historiography as victims of the Nazis, which has in turn silenced their experiences. So we can see there is a connection with asocials and heterosexual sex, which is vilified. But where same-sex relations are discussed, we still see that connection with asocials, which has further stigmatised their status. I use the term same-sex experience rather than lesbian, as those women who engaged in same-sex relations in camps may not have identified prior to or after 1945 as a lesbian or been physically attracted to women. They may just have desired intimacy, such as embracing. The majority from testimony from survivors depict women who engaged in same-sex relations as immoral, committing depraved acts and refer to them as asocial. This further connects asocial women with actions that were considered at that time as sexually immoral. Now, there is a gap in research with female same-sex encounters, and those scholars such as Anna Hayakova and Rosanna Ramsden have encouraged and engaged in this discourse regarding this topic. There is still more research to be completed. I draw briefly attention to the female same-sex relations, not as an addition to, but an example of how sexual acts deemed by society and the Nazis as unbecoming of a woman were vilified and attached to the category of asocial. Oh, sorry. Oh, well. So to conclude, I will draw upon Zoe Waxman's observation about the problematic nature of gender expectations for women in the Third Reich. Waxman notes that actions amongst women that do not accord with expected behaviour are avoided in the narrative because their experiences were controlled by rigid ideas about patterns of suitable behaviour in Nazi Germany. The problem for female asocials is that there is a historic connection with what was considered sexually immoral behaviour that went against what was considered acceptable. The Nazis were able to focus on this connection, reinforcing and criminalising it, resulting in a misconception as to what crime a female asocial had actually committed. There is limited testimony available from the female asocials about their experiences, which would challenge these misconceptions, as they do not speak out due to fear of continued discrimination towards themselves or their families, due to that continued connection with the asocial sexual deviant stereotype, and that they will not be considered a survivor of persecution. As I stated at the beginning, they were not recognised as a survivor until a persecuted survivor until 2020. When female asocials are discussed from a gender perspective, we do not find sexual deviants or prostitutes, but women who challenged the Nazis and social norm through a variety of factors, which I haven't covered all of them, but such as employment and black market activities. When explored, their actions highlight contradictions in the Nazis' control of the female body and state. But because their voices are not heard in testimony, we see them through historic preconceived ideas about their character. Female asocials were not anti-fascist fighters. They were not an ethnically or racially persecuted group. And unfortunately, their crime of not conforming to society did not evoke sympathy before, during, and after the Third Reich. However, when approached from a gender perspective, the silence around female asocial experiences reveals how the Nazis were able to reinforce this historic negative stereotype to control the female body. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and for introducing also this topic. Now we have the third presentation. Is it working? It's okay. We have Jesse Tannetta from from the Gratz College from the USA. He is a former high school teacher, and now he's program manager for ECO's Reflections, specializing in providing professional development to middle and high school teachers, focused on Holocaust education. And now he's starting with his PhD, really? Okay, analyzing the life of concentration camp guard, Hermann Braunsteiner, and your presentation is focused on the female perpetrators. Please.
Excellent, thank you. I don't think that I can say it as eloquently as Verena started, but to speak in solidarity for Israel and to condemn the terrorist organization of Hamas. So I thank you for starting there, and I echo that statement. thankfully, I don't remember what my introduction was, so I'm glad that you said that about my hope is to take some of the research about concentration camp guards and specifically female perpetrators within the concentration camp system and put them in a lens that we can then teach our students and our teachers in the United States to better understand these people, who they were, who they are for those that are still alive, and how do we use their experiences in their life and their actions to better understand the Holocaust and basically to try to answer the question that students always have is how could this have happened? And so here we see the beautiful beast. So again, thinking about how we frame female perpetrators and the dichotomy of women as calm and gentle and docile with the actions that were perpetrated by them. And so this dichotomy has hurt our scholarship because it has hindered our ability to judge them, to understand them, to study them, and ultimately to learn from them because we have put these gender norms to these women. And so we think of them as beasts, as abominations, as inhuman, as monsters. And if we think that the description of concentration camp guards and the actions and brutality and viciousness of their actions are true, which they are, but if we also believe that women are supposed to be these docile, calm people, that both of those things can't be true. And so if they are both true, we either have two decisions. We can paint them as monsters and inhuman and abominations and people that are not human, and thus we can't understand their actions, and that this was a unique time in history of these horrible mutations, but we don't have to worry about it anymore. Or we can see them as human beings that made decisions and made choices and then acted upon them. And so as we think about that, we also obviously have a lot of the misogynistic beliefs of sexualizing these people as well. So whether that was horrible movies in the 70s and 80s, like the She-Wolf of the SS, or others, we're just not able to learn from a group of people if we frame them as that type of thing and not a person. And so the hope is that to see these women as real, that they were human beings, that they had beliefs, that they made decisions, that they acted upon those decisions, and they had agency. And by saying that they had agency, we are thinking about their ability to make decisions based on their beliefs and based on the circumstances of their life and based on the situation that arises and also within the power system that they are in which they are allowed to make those choices and decisions. And so when we think about women having agency in this time period, we also have to think about they are, no matter how high they rise up in the Nazi system of perpetration, they can never be in charge. And so what does that mean? And also that they are seen as, you know, only coming into the workforce because of men going to war in the Wehrmacht. And so we also have to think about that power vacuum as well, and also thinking about their past. And so one way that I wanted to show that kind of quickly in this presentation is through a case study of looking at one person, their life, their circumstances, their agency, and how they chose to make those decisions, choose those actions, and the life that they lived. And so I chose Joanna Langefeld, who is, her research about her is finally starting to come about. Not much was known about her, you know, before about 25 years ago. She's born in 1900. She marries. She's, you know, lives at home. They don't have any children yet. And her husband dies in 1924. She then has a child out of wedlock. So now we're talking about a widow. We're talking about a single mother. We're talking about someone who really lives in destitution after 1929 and the global economic crash. She's moving from place to place. She's staying in shelters. She's unable to hold a job. And again, she has a son to care for. And so we're thinking about the circumstances that are in her adult life as well. And it's not until she secures a stable and well-paying job as a prison guard at Lichtenberg in 1934 under the Nazi system that she, for the first time, has a stable residence. She can put food on her table. She can support her son. and she has an opportunity for career advancement. And so it is because of that that she becomes the chief overseer at the newly constructed Ravensbrück in 1939. This is the only known photograph of her. She's in the far right in a visit from Himmler, who would visit frequently as he had a friend that lived nearby. And so when we think about Langenfelder, just gave her a lot of the circumstances of her life. And so what about her belief system? Like, what is also driving her actions? And she's a devout believer in Nazi ideology. She is a deeply anti-Semitic. She hates Jews. She's clear in her contempt and her treatment of Jews as the leader of Ravensbrück, treats them violently with contempt. That is a deeply held belief in her belief system. She also believes in rehabilitation. She believes in the prison system. She, outside of the Jews that she controls as chief overseer, she believes that what she's doing is good. When Ravensbrück begins, they, much like the prison system today, collect belongings. They put them in paper bags. They store them in a warehouse. Those inmates that are released get their items back and go when they are released from prison. And so we're talking about a woman who has some deeply held beliefs. And, I think clearly if someone believes in the rehabilitation system, she spends a lot of time advocating for herself, leveraging her power and knowledge to be in control of all female matters, even if she is under the direction of a male SS commandant. And yet we see that deep belief and yet this deeply anti-Semitic treatment of Jews throughout the life when she is in charge. And I think one small anecdote to kind of really demonstrate her belief in rehabilitation is that she is sent to the Birkenau women's camp to set it up the way that she had set up Ravensbrück, and she lobbies to be returned back to Ravensbrück because she sees Birkenau as a place of death where she can't actually rehabilitate the people that are sent there. And so we have that idea, we have that belief, or we know that about her, and yet when she's in charge of Ravensbrück, the 14F13 program begins. She is brutal to Jews, signs off on the murder of thousands, but also kind of believes in this prison system. And so again, we're thinking about this woman who owes her steady employment, her economic security, her power, her career advancement, all to the Nazi regime, which also she believes is she's doing good, right? She's doing her part to improve German society. And so kind of thinking about that and making sure that I was very short in time to make sure we have time for questions. So what do we learn from this small case study? What do we learn from an approach of looking at these women as full human beings, as 360-degree individuals, as multifaceted people? If we learn about how an individual person or a group can devolve into brutality, into cruelty, into murder, we must see them as agents of their own lives. They have belief systems. We can challenge those belief systems. We can judge them for being wrong. But we can also understand if they believe that so strongly, then of course these are the actions that she will take. But also recognize her circumstances, the decisions she makes, and then her actions, right? And if we view them as human beings with this agency to make those decisions, we're also able to judge their actions. We're able to learn from them. We're able to understand them better. We don't put them as demons that are unable to be understood, but as people like us, like people that we know, like people within our own society, and try to understand, well, what led them to these decisions? What's their belief system? What are the circumstances that they're in? What is going on in the society around them to think that they're doing good or doing well in this society, and to create guardrails and programs and other aspects of social life to hopefully curtail those evil intentions of human beings put in these positions. So and kind of I guess one last kind of small anecdote I wasn't thinking of sharing, but I have a minute to do that, is one about coming from Margaret Buber-Newman, who was a survivor. She was a survivor of Stalinist Gulag, as well as the German concentration camps in Ravensbrück as a secretary to Joanna Langefeld. And she tells this anecdote of as new guards were being brought to Ravensbrück as they started their job training, that a woman bumped into an inmate and apologized and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, like, it's my first day," like, you know, the way that any employee would do on their kind of first day. And within a few days, that kind of system of training, of devaluing human life, of anti-Semitism, really, obviously, as we see in the story of female perpetrators within concentration camps, clearly leads them to accept and become brutal, vicious, and perpetrate. And so we must look at them in judgment. And so I will end with that story and with the focus on the victims. I think it's very important when we talk about perpetrator behavior that they become perpetrators because they violate victims, that they harm victims, that they kill victims. And so it's the victim stories that are always the center of these stories. And so even as we look at someone like Joanna Langefeld's life and the decisions that she makes them in a way that harms individual people. And so we always need to refocus our studies on the victims and make sure that their story and their voices are always the loudest and the most important and the central part. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And now the last presentation for this session. Randi Becker, she studied social sciences and in Gießen, and she did a bachelor thesis about the forced prostitution in concentration camps, and then 2 master programs with thesis on women as perpetrators and their representation in memorial sites, and another one with a thesis on reproductions of anti-Semitism within the concept of intersectionality. Now she's doing a PhD. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Passau, and she's teaching political education in a state educational center for the German civil service. And your presentation is focused on the research projects with prospective teachers on local women history. Please.
Can you hear me? Is this, yeah? Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, and also thank you very much to the organizers for this lovely and very interesting conference and for the invitation. And I should also say hello for my students, who are really honored that their project is being presented today, as well as I am. Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, you already talked about my studies. I studied sociology and political theory, and I've repeatedly investigated the role of gender in National Socialism. And then shortly after my own master's degree, I was offered, quite unexpectedly, I have to say, a visiting teaching position at the University of Gießen. And I thought, what could I teach? So my first seminar concept was about women in National Socialism, and it was part of the module Introduction to Political Education in the summer semester of 2020, a module for prospective teachers of all subjects. And I offered the seminar on women in National Socialism, and I particularly have 3 things that have stayed in my mind from this seminar, from the first one I basically ever did with students at the university. The first one was that the students themselves had never come into contact with the topic of women in National Socialism at school, and this focus was really new to them. The second one is that the participants then showed an above average interest and commitment to the topic, and then wrote really great term papers, which unfortunately disappeared in my basement after reading once and being graded, which is what happens when you're just a visiting lecturer. And the third is, during the seminar, we dealt with women during National Socialism on a general level, I would say. And that was interesting, but in retrospect, I missed the local references. So So after the first one, I did some research and then realized there was no introductory literature at all about the area of Gießen, which is a rather small university town close to Frankfurt, regarding women in National Socialism. There are a few articles about individual women or individual places that are related to women, but no texts that focus specifically on women in Gießen during the Nazi era, and not really easy texts, like for students, you wouldn't find any. So I asked myself, how can I address local women under National Socialism in my seminars and contribute to a thematization in the city and the region as well? So teach, and also with this teaching, teach maybe a broader public. So it's basically a public history project as well, not only teaching. So I asked myself, how can the students and I find out more about local women during the Nazi regime, learn for ourselves, and perhaps even produce something that will also enable others to learn and engage with the topic, and maybe produce some learning materials for schools or something. And from this impulse, 2 projects or seminars have emerged that I did the last years, which I would like to present now. So the first one is a seminar from 2021. I've first then offered another seminar on women during National Socialism in the summer of 21, which resulted in a booklet, that's the one that's in front of me right now, on various women biographies in National Socialism in Gießen. Because of the pandemic, the seminar took place exclusively digitally, so we really never met, only after the publication, and we knew from the beginning that archive visits in this seminar would not be possible. So in preparation for the seminar, I tried to find out as many names as possible from women who had lived during National Socialism, that had a connection to the city of Gießen, and whose stories were already part of existing literature that would be accessible to my students despite the pandemic. I tried to examine all the literature on Gießen under National Socialism for women's names, and then created an extensive Excel table with all the names and all the literature references I could find. And I also prepared support sheets on how to do research and on the formalities of the texts to be submitted, because they are prospective teachers and not historians that did those kind of research. Okay, and then we have the seminar. The seminar then took place digitally with 48 students, which was quite a lot, and all of whom were studying to become teachers, but were studying completely different teaching subjects. So some did physics, some did chemistry, some did math. Already in the first session, I presented the idea of my booklet about Gießen's women to the students and presented them with a big table with all possible topics. And then in the second session, the students had to decide for one topic. And so they all had their own topic or name, which they were to do research on and work for the whole semester. In the seminar sessions, we then read and discussed general texts on women in National Socialism together. We dealt with the ideologies of National Socialism and its gender images, which really connects well to both of your talks. Then looked at specific strands of persecution, and then also worked on women as perpetrators. In each session, some students also presented the status of their research. In addition, I also offered weekly digital hours to support their research. And in September 2021, all the participants handed in their term papers, which consisted of short texts, pictures, and picture descriptions. And they also did a research diary, so I could understand where they got the information from. And then, with the consent of the authors, I then used the material to design this booklet, which was published then 1 year later in December 2020. Thanks to my cooperation partners, it could been printed 1,000 times, and it's available free of charge to everyone interested in the city. So that's it. The booklet is designed as a city tour explicitly for political education. So it consists of 48 short texts on around 120 pages. And the texts present the biographies of 23 women from Gießen and frame these biographies with introductory texts to make it more, I don't know, to understand the context. And each biography is linked to a stop or an address in Gießen, a specific address, a house, a square. So at the very beginning, you will find this map. And the idea is that you can plan your individual group tour or individual tour. So schools can use it, but you can use it on your own if you want. That was the idea. And then we have a specific structure, and I'm just showing you the overview. So those are all the texts that we have. It's 48, and I tried to make different chapters. So the purple one on the left are introductory texts that deal with women in National Socialism in general. So there's one introduction in the topic of sexuality, in gender stereotypes, for example. And then we have the dark green on the left, which focuses on anti-Semitism and biographies of Jewish women from my city. Then we have the political persecution, which is also green, with one biography. We have the stories of 2 Sinti women in this booklet. And then we have a lighter green, which is kind of a mixture of different biographies. So we have persecution of lesbians. We have, with one biographies, we have an overview article on women as asocials. We have an article on forced sterilization, victims of the so-called Nazi euthanasia, and also forced labor, with 2 biographies. And then on the right, which is also important, the blue chapters are women as perpetrators. So it's not only about victims, but also about women as perpetrators. And there we have biographies of women from Gießen who were in politics, in the militia or the medical field. And then the last one is the orange chapter, which is women in the resistance. Yeah, it's a lot, I know. Thank you. So the booklet is intended to be a low threshold opportunity for all of those interested in the history of local women under National Socialism. Though the texts are short, they should be easy language. And in doing so, we wanted to show the range of different realities of women's lives under National Socialism at a very local level. And so far, the feedback has been quite positive, and the interest is great. So we will print a second edition probably end of this year. And now I'm going to show you another project. That's the one I did the year after, in the summer semester of 2020. I offered another seminar on women in National Socialism, and this time the focus was Ravensbrück, so women from Gießen in Ravensbrück. And for this seminar, I too did extensive research in the beginning, so I could at least tell the students again how many files there are on certain persons, and where they could find the files, in which archives. And in the first session, all 18 students chose one name or a topic from my table and received their initial instructions from me on how to do the research. And then in the second session, we had a visit from our local archivist, the head of the local archive. He's visited us, and we asked him all sorts of questions, because like they're teachings, soon to be teachers, so they don't really know how to go to an archive. And we had a lot of questions like, how do you prepare? Can you touch it? How does it work? It was really nice, actually. So we asked him, and then the students spent the whole semester researching in various archives. So not only in Gießen, but in the greater region. And we also prepared together for the upcoming field trip that we did. And again, I did a lot of office hours to make sure that they were supported in their research. And then at the beginning of September last year, so it was September 2022, we went to the Ravensbrück Memorial together for a few days from Wednesday to Sunday, and we visited the memorial together with Matthias Heil. He's the head of the education department, and we learned a lot about Ravensbrück with him, and above all, we used the opportunity to ask him a lot of questions because the students already had some results from their research, but still there were a lot of open questions, so Matthias could help us a lot. And in addition, all students had the opportunity to spend a few hours in the memorial archive, which was also amazing and really kindly supported by their staff. And this research resulted in a traveling exhibition, this one, with 22 short texts on 13 biographies from central Hessen, which is the region around Gießen. Those 13 people all have been in Ravensbrück, but also have a connection to my city. And the students submitted their texts, most of which were quite long, like 10, 12 pages, and also pictures at the end of September last year. And then I tried until this spring to shorten them, edit them, and try to fit them on 22 roll-ups. So it looks a little bit like this one, 22 of them. And in June, we put everything into the final layout and then printed it. So it's quite new. It only got printed in a few months ago. And this exhibition is structured in such a way that the focus is on the women's stories of persecution, and on the other hand, that the exhibition is as comprehensible as possible for younger groups, so also for students at high school level. So the exhibition starts with a cover page and a preface, and then 3 texts that meant to introduce Ravensbrück, the history of the concentration camp Ravensbrück, and then the path from our area to Ravensbrück. And this is followed by biographies, which are preceded by introductory articles on the respective persecution group, which you hopefully can see here. So, like, we have general information on the persecution history of that group. For example, Jewish people in Gießen, how were the steps of persecution in the area, what is important to know, and then the biographies follow, so you hopefully can understand the context. And the roll-ups will tour in the whole area of central Hessen, so not only Gießen, but also other cities close by. And I could arrange until now that the exhibition will be shown in 4 or 5 schools and in 1 museum, in a city library and a youth center. So I think we have 11 stops at the moment planned for the next year. So hopefully it will reach a lot of people. Finally, I would like to talk about the idea and do's and don'ts, that maybe lessons learned that I took away from these 2 projects, because I hope that these projects can be an inspiration for your own local projects, but maybe also it's a quite German approach, because it will not work in every country, obviously, so we can discuss that. I would first say that you should think carefully about your own resources around such a project, because students can quickly and quite rightly be overwhelmed by such a research. It's just, they did a lot, and I was amazed how much they found, but still it's a lot. So it's our responsibility as teachers to prepare the project in such a way that the tasks the students take on are well manageable for them. So you need to do extensive preparation, otherwise you can't just tell them go to the archive and do it yourself. Depending on your own status, you should also give enough thought to the funding of such projects, because I'm just a visiting lecturer, so it was not that easy to get funding for this. And you have to apply, and this costs a lot of time, and in addition to the actual project, so that's something you should think about. And also, you need to plan a lot of time for office hours, because you can't leave the students alone with this material, and they will have a lot of questions, and they will need a lot of support. And ideally, I would also advise to do this kind of projects with a maximum of 20 students maybe, and also maybe take 2 semesters instead of 1, which I couldn't arrange for my project, but I think it would be better. And then also plan enough time for editing the project, because it just takes a lot of time. In addition, special attention should be also paid to the sensitivity of the data. That's something I'm still thinking about a lot. So we are publishing real people's stories here, and it's important to treat them with care and respect, and really take care and really look at what you want to publish and which kind of information is maybe too much. So that's also just a big thing you have to reflect on. But with such projects, I think you can make learning possible on very many levels. So the students will and did learn more about the history and the local history of National Socialism, and they will take that knowledge back to their future schools as future teachers. And some of them will maybe even start their own project at their schools, because they are starting to go into like finishing their studies now and going into schools. And it's really nice to see that they are still really motivated to do more research. Then also we hopefully make learning possible for the local public. So we bring the history of Ravensbrück back to Gießen, which has not been done up until now in this region. Also, we came in contact with relatives of the women. So all of the women are dead at least 10 years, but some daughters have contacted us, or nieces, in many cases our research was an opportunity for them as well, to learn more about their mothers or relatives, as they had not seen all the files that we found. So it was kind of a common learning process for all of us, and was really interesting. And I think I'm going to stop now, and I thank you very much for your attention. And
thank you very much, and congratulations for all these projects and activities, and for sharing with us your experience. And I would also like to thank you, the organizers and my colleagues, for giving me the possibility to be the chair of this panel, this really inspiring panel, because I think that we have on the table different topics from the experience of the Roma and Sinti, and the female Asocials and the female perpetrators, but we have also another really important thing, that is the research on one hand, on one side, and the educational side on the other hand. And I think that for all of us is really important not only to have the research, but also how to use the results of the research in the educational systems. So we have 20 minutes for the discussion. 20 minutes, please.
First, I wanted to say that I think the world needs more educators and researchers that we have seen here on this panel and today, and it's just really very optimistic in terms of the fact that future generations will have material to learn from. So thank you, everybody. I have two questions. One is to Randi. You didn't mention any Jewish women in Gießen, or any rescuers, any women who might have worked on rescue of Jews. And then I have a question about the prostitutes, and from what I knew in Auschwitz, that after they prostituted in the brothels for a while, they killed them. So I don't know, was that different in Dachau than it was in Auschwitz in terms of the brothels?
It's okay.
Okay, so there are a lot of biographies on Jewish women in both projects, but on rescuers, not at all, because I haven't found any stories about local rescuers. And also, like, the only rescuer stories I read were in testimonies of perpetrators that tried to say, well, I rescued that one. So they are really difficult stories, and I would be suspicious about local stories on rescuers in Germany in general. So it would be interesting to look at if there are some. Yeah. Yeah. That would be a very, that would be interesting. I didn't look into that. But that would be interesting. That would be a good source because, the German files, it's all lies. Yeah.
And in relation to your question about the fate of the prostitutes, so the research I found so far, so I've been looking mainly at Ravensbrück and Mauthausen, and Dachau, and though the women selected were told that they would be released after 6 months, so there's one woman I found who spent nearly 2 years, and when she was liberated was in such a terrible state emotionally and physically. But I have found 3 women who actually, when they had served over a year in the brothels, they were actually placed in overseer roles. So actually 2 of them became a capo and another one actually ended up working in the administration. So though a lot of the testimony says that the women were either taken out and they were killed or they died for conditions, I have found some examples where the women actually were given roles that a functional status role, which is further perpetuated that perception of an asocial as being unworthy, the fact they were collaborating even more because when they came out of the brothels they were given a functionary role. So I found examples of that.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful panel. First of all, I found myself jotting down notes the entire time. So I have a comment or a question for everyone, but I'll keep it short. To start, I want to say, Randi, what a fascinating project. And I think, you have on a pedagogical level, students creating knowledge, publishing, you're bringing them incrementally through this process. It's outstanding. I'm wondering if there's been any pushback from family members of, say, folks who collaborated or were perpetrators, if those descendants had anything not so positive to say in working with your students. And Verena, I'm wondering, so I recently wrote, it should be out this year, a book review on Saya Stoika's collection of her memoirs in English. They're only last year did they appear in English. So the fact that it took that long, I think, speaks volumes. The most well-known, anyways. But the question that I had more specifically was, the early literature and scholarship came from, quote, outsiders. But once it was written by folks who were not outsiders, was that the entry point through which women started voicing their experiences or concerns, or did that come later? If that makes sense. And then the next one was for Claire. So I'm wondering, in terms of asocials, how you contend with the, diversity, the varying identities of folks who were under the blanket term of asocial, because it really became the catch-all for the sterilization law, right? You have asocial at the very bottom in addition to these other conditions, but it really became the blanket catch-all for absolutely everything. So someone who, I worked extensively with the sterilization files in Detmold, and so the women who were identified as asocial have written life stories. There's thousands of them in the archives there. We'll chat later. But there have been folks whose brother, for instance, was a communist and they were sterilized as asocial. Someone who stole a bike who was sterilized as asocial. And so really under this label you have, there's very little cohesion in the sense that there's, in addition to the fact that there's no cohesion based on these different identities, there was also conflict between them, right? Folks who were sterilized would oftentimes say, and I'm not even asocial, or I'm not even handicapped. And so you see how, because there's such a diversity of people under this umbrella term, that even amongst themselves there's very little unity. So how you contend with that. And then the last one was for Jessie. And I'm wondering, in terms of the way that women were seen as either docile or or beast-like, right? And I get the impression you mean to say that like the reconciliation of that becomes this almost like femme fatale of someone who's dangerous, who's hyper-sexed. I mean, when we look at how these women were written about, the sexy beast or the bitch of Buchenwald, and then in the US in the 70s, the most popular pornography being of a concentration camp guard being reenacted. So I'm wondering if this hypersexualization pulls women out of this almost Madonna whore dichotomy, if this hypersexualization is also removing their humanness, like if they then become a thing or an object, a hypersexualized object, and that's how they contend with this difficult reconciliation.
Okay, just please, just if you can answer to this question, and then we will move to
Okay. The question to me was about the pushbacks from perpetrator families. So we never asked anyone because we only published stuff that we were allowed to, working with open files. And with the booklet, we also only worked with literature. So there was not really new stuff, but still, well, in some cases it was interesting. So I'm still waiting on maybe pushback, so we will see if there will be some. It's possible. In some cases, I wanted my name to be the co-author of the biography, just to make sure that not a student of mine would get some blame if there would be a legal process. And there was one interesting biography on a lesbian woman whose not really a daughter, but a relative thought she was a really persecuted lesbian and a feminist, and we found out that she was a blockwart actually. So she was part in a lot of National Socialist organizations, which was an interesting conversation to have with the relative, because we talked about it with her, and I sent her the text before we published it just to make sure that she knows and that she can give me feedback if she wants to, and she didn't. So yeah, so I tried to be proactive about it if I could, but in general we didn't have contact to all the people that we did research on, or the relatives of those people.
To answer briefly, translation is a problem in general. I think there should be a lot more translations out there. We heard of like very interesting testimonies and memoirs here, like from former Yugoslavia or Serbia, and they are not available to us. And it's like a key access for like knowledge production. And if we don't understand the language, these voices are muted. So I think that's very crucial for many other occasions too. There is lately, it is it's a field that is establishing, and lately there's also more attention on the gendered perspective, but in academia not so much. It's mostly like activists, and now they will be at the Humboldt University. There will be a lecture series this semester on Romani feminism. And it's with a lot of Romani activists and scholars themselves. Yeah. So it's starting, and we are part of it.
Thank you. Good question. So yeah, I'll keep my answer brief as well. You're very right. The definition for being an asocial was so vague, and it was kept deliberately vague to allow for that manipulation. Sterilisation is not an area that I focus a lot on in my paper, because I believe it would be a paper in itself if you look at the asocials. But what I use that is to highlight how they started in 1933 with asocials, and then they were able to manipulate it and focus it towards the female body, and then we see it develop further, and we see women and how they're using their body, and that connection, which is what's represented in historiography and stereotypes today. So that's how I use it. But no, that was a good question, because yeah, my paper actually focuses more on sort of who these female asocials were, how they've managed to manipulate it so it's now focused towards the female body, and why we're not hearing these voices. But thank you.
And then my question was about whether the hypersexualization of female perpetrators dehumanizes them and also takes away their humanity. And I think that answer is an obvious yes, but I just wanted to give it a little bit more context of, if we think about that first question of, well, if women are docile and calm and homemakers and have compassion, but they also committed these horrible crimes and were brutal and vicious, that doesn't make sense, right? And so the first attempt to make it not make sense is to call them beasts and monsters. And then as more information is gained, as more research is done, as more knowledge is done, it's, oh, well, they really did do these things, and they were women. Okay, well, if they're not monsters, then how can we make it sound like they're not part of the normal, regular human experience? And so we'll hypersexualize them, we'll turn them into an object. And I wish I could remember the name here, but just to kind of give you that one thought that I thought of while you were asking the question is that the International Criminal Tribunal of Rwanda with, I believe her first name is Agatha, and I can't remember her last name, but she came to court every day in the tribunal wearing like a grandmother's sweater and wore a big Christian cross and sat very, in the gender stereotypes of this like nice old woman. And yet she's on trial and they're recounting her horrible crimes and the decisions and actions that she had. And so even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we're still having this thought, these questions, this part of that disconnect between how can this woman who is supposed to be this nice grandmother with her sweater and her big Christian cross also be ordering the rape of hundreds of thousands of people. And so I think that it's part of the process of trying to understand how this woman who's supposed to be this way could commit these crimes. And I think it's part of kind of the human attempt to discredit them or to make them not human so that we don't have to worry about what that says about us.
Thank you. We have now two questions here and then another one here. And
I'll start with one remark for you. Stoika is an artist, a Roma artist, and I have a lot of her drawings, and I wrote about her. And if you want some information, I'll give it to you. Now, for you, the program is sensational. And you get it from an educator after 40-something years. My question is, you were a visitor scholar, a visitor teacher at one place. You wrote a program. What's going to happen with this program in Germany, in land of Hessen? Will it be... That's a very crucial question, because you invested so much energy, thoughts, a lot of time, and your students, and it was successful. That's the point. It was successful. What's going to happen with your program? Listen, I wrote programs, and they are on the shelves. I think this is the place to help you. Exactly. I'll tell you later. We're gonna talk to you, but you didn't do anything with it. Just a project. You are satisfied and you go on. No.
So. Thank you for the question. I would be happy to do everything with this, but at the moment, the booklet will be reprinted in a second edition, and then we will probably do an online version, so the locals know in English. Okay, yeah, but
must be in English.
Okay, maybe again in English.
It's for the world.
yes,
not only
transport in Germany.
Okay.
No, not at all, because we can copy this kind of program to any country, any city in the world.
Yes.
So English.
Okay, I would like to go on with what Batya said. We have in WHISC a workshop. Verena is one of our distinguished leaders in one of the groups, and we are dealing with the same thing. And we will help you, because this is really a treasure that must be shared in the world, not only in your little place. This is number one. So we shall talk to you after this panel. I do want to make two remarks. First of all, women as mass murderers. There has been done lots of studies, including some of mine, that if you look at percentages, not pick one name, but percentages, unlike men who were overwhelmed with ideology and hatred, many women who have done horrible things in different duties in camps and ghettos, nurses, etc., nurses that were injecting, killing injections, they came to their jobs for very indifferent reasons. First of all, they were from very small places and they wanted a better life with better salary. Some of them came as secretaries of a commander, and they had the dream, maybe I start as his mistress and then I can replace the wife. And it's very interesting, and there was a very deep study done to compare and contrast these mass murderers with Islamic women murderers, bombers, etc. It was done by Anat Berko. And one of the conclusions of that study was that unlike men, its gender, women are carried to those places. And if you really ask them, but was it your belief or your ideology? No, she wanted a better life. This is one thing. The other thing that I wanted to point out, that Jewish women, in spite of Katzetnik's famous book, The House of Dolls, that is describing the joy barrack in Auschwitz, where the border was functioning, there were no Jewish women there. There are Barrack 24, right? There is a legend, but so many researchers, as Naama Schick, as Rochelle, as Nomi Levenkron, they have spent lots of time to study the issue. There were no Jewish women among them. There were asocial women, German, Serbs, Slavs, etc. No Jews because of the racial right. But if a Jewish woman was raped and anyone has complained, the rapist was punished. Not because of the mercy for the Jewish female, but because of the right, the racism. So we have to bear it in mind. So, and be careful when we are talking, because these are things that were checked. And my fear as an educator and a researcher is when we are not very punctual in our details, it can bring people to relativization of the Holocaust. Because if you are giving me misinformation in one thing, how should I believe you in the other thing? So if you are telling that there were Jewish whores in Block 24 and they were not, So maybe the whole story about the 6 million is also just a story. Maybe it was 600, 6,000, maybe just 6, who knows? So we have to be, we as Holocaust scholars and teachers, we must be very, very careful. Thank you.
So wait. We have 5 minutes more. I don't know if you want to answer or not.
Do you have time for one more question? No?
Well, I think that we can take also a few minutes more, right? I mean,
I was just going to make the comment about the prostitutes. Yes, so all my research focused on Asocials is a German, what was considered Aryan women. And if there's any reference to any Jewish women being found in a bordel, it was an administration error, and they were quickly taken out. So they were only literally in there for an hour. That's what I found. But they were literally that they arrived and then they were taken out. That's the information I found. But I've not found. I've not found any Jewish women. I will have to look at my papers, and I'll let you. And when I talk about prostitutes, I don't talk about, it's not any Jewish women. So my research is not focused on Jewish women.
Hello, good day. Thank you. My name is Miško Sanasic. I'm a director of terraforming and member of Serbian IRA delegation. It has been mentioned earlier, but I think that it is worth emphasizing that also we in the audience stand fast and firmly with Israel and our friends there. We love you. I have a question to Verena. When you were in your introductory section mentioning some challenges, particularly when it comes to research on the experiences of Sinti and Roma, one of the obstacles you described was and is the lack of Roma and Sinti researchers involved in the research. And I find it a bit problematic. I think that we are often making this kind of simplification. There is a distinguish between inclusivity and including perspectives of the Roma and understanding the culture and understanding the Roma and Sinti as people, and then necessity of being Roma or Sinti to be involved in research or education about it, because then do I need to be a homosexual or a woman to research these topics? I really don't think so. And I think that, and I'm saying this because we are facing problems when approaching Roma communities or producing materials on the history of persecution and genocide of the Roma and Sinti, being accused that we are outsiders from the community. And I think it's an obstacle. Of course, we have no problems with. Quite contrary, we would love to cooperate with the Roma communities and include the Roma voices and everything, but I think that we should be careful about, dismissing people that are not members of the community and contributing to it. I just wanted to hear your opinion on that. Thank you so much.
Or you can say it also about Jews and non-Jews. That's why I'm not totally agreeing with you. But yes, an outside researcher cannot see what the actual society can bring up. So I think a mutual research, that's the solution. Yeah.
So I understand your position, and I also understand where you're coming from, because I'm not a Romnia or a Sintica, and I'm an outsider myself. And when I work with family members and descendants, and when I work with families and descendants, I also experienced like a big war of mistrust, first of all, and it really takes a lot of time. And I showed you the picture of Eva Justine, the one who was doing the measurements, and it's very specific also to the German community, where almost every family, like you have meters, like from that side of the room to this side of the room, with pedigrees of families that male and female researchers did. And I understand this mistrust. And when I made this introductory remarks, it was more in, not to say like people who are not part of the community shouldn't do research now because they don't understand what's going on. My point was that because people who did not understand their culture and worked as outsiders on it, they sometimes projected their stereotypes and prejudices on it, and for so long that like this research had been done or started quite late, and like was influenced by these continuities of stereotypical thinking. And here I would agree with Batya, like how can we overcome prejudice in social psychology? It said one of the best ways is direct contact. And like I myself find it very, very, especially when I deal with intergenerational traumata, and like when I work with the families, it's like I'm part of it too. I experience like the symptoms of this as someone who's close to them, and for me it's very helpful to work closely with them and to speak about it. So I would agree we should do it mutually together. And I also, after breaking down this wall of mistrust, I now hear from descendants that they are very grateful that I spent hours of my lifetime in the archives doing the kind of research they could not do because they don't want to go so deep.
We have time for two more comments. So do you know? Okay, on the one.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Chiara. This panel was wonderful. Thank you to you all. Just a remark about an information about your. I'm really happy with the education aspect of your work, and yes, I hope that your project will be replicated in all the world, as suggested by a colleague. But I think that there is also another question. We don't know the everyday work made by school teachers in this direction. So there are so many. I know so many teachers in Italy, in France, in German that work on similar project on local history, archives, and I think that there is a natural separation between the academia and the school work. So maybe a good idea could be to launch a conference or a call for projects in schools, because I think that we will be surprised by the number of teachers that work on these topics every day. So thank you, and thank you for all the teachers that don't dare to answer to this kind of call for proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that we can continue during the lunch break. Okay, thank you very much.